You're listening to Parasearch Radio. News, views and reviews from the world of the paranormal from across the UK and beyond. Find us on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web. The views and opinions expressed by presenters and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Parasearch Radio or their affiliates and sponsors. Listener discretion is advised.
Good evening and welcome to Parasearch Radio's special interviews. My name is Kerry Greenaway and tonight I have got an absolute cracking show for you. I've got a pair of people in the studio with me that I can't quite believe I'm talking to tonight. I've been admiring their work for quite a while now from afar. They're the owners and people of Travelling Museum of the Paranormal and the Occult, Planet Weird and the smash hit Hellier. Good evening, Greg and Dana Newkirk. Welcome.
Hey,
Hello.
Thank you for having us.
I'm absolutely thrilled. Thank you for joining me. You're coming to the UK very, very soon. You're coming to Sage Paracon. You're a pair of speakers there this year. And I kind of want to take you back because I've got so much I want to ask you. It's untrue. But I kind of want to take you back to the beginning of your paranormal journey because you both stepped into it very young, didn't you?
Yeah, I think we date ourselves a bit when we say that we both had GeoCities websites, which were free Google websites back in the very, very early 2000s, late, like 1999, 98. And we both ran rival ghost hunting websites.
And we hated each other.
We did.
We were bitter rivals.
My team were a bunch of girls from Canada, and Greg was in a group of a
bunch of dumb boys from Pennsylvania.
Bunch of mean boys.
And we actually didn't start that way.
No.
Dana and her group reached out to us because they were like, "Hey, these guys are about our age. They're doing cool stuff, you know." So we had a really great relationship for a while, and then her and her friends got a television show, and we were a bunch of very, very jealous young men. And so instead of fostering a friendship, we recreated their whole website, but it featured us in drag, and then we SEO bombed it so people would find us when they went to find Dana.
Very mean.
And then we didn't
Very
talk for 7 years.
Yeah, very mean. God, why did you give him a second chance, Dana?
Well, I was very paranoid when we first met. I was very suspicious of him being nice. So I definitely gave him. He had a long time to sort of prove his.
No, listen.
His
I only teased because I really had a crush on her.
That's probably true.
I had a crush on her, and I knew that it was a forbidden love because Dana was a little older than me, and that's a big deal when you're like 16. Not so much when you're in your 30s. But
yeah,
it was a big deal back then, and she had a boyfriend anyway. So.
Well, and now we're married,
and
so
now we're
apparently
married.
It all worked out.
See, guys, always be mean to the girls you like.
Don't listen.
That's
to
the moral of the story.
No,
Yeah,
terrible.
That's
Terrible
not true.
advice.
That's not true.
Terrible.
Let's go back to old-fashioned morals with that one and woo the girl that you like. Woo them.
Yes.
Now you
probably would have worked a little better. Saved me a lot of groveling.
Now, you both approach the paranormal from very different perspectives. Dana, you're very, very spiritual in the way you work. And Greg, you're more skeptical and like the more facts and figures of it all, don't you?
I think that's probably fair. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I try and toe the line.
Yeah, I think we kind of have a nice balance because, you know, he can ground me and I can kind of get him out of his head a little bit. But, I mean, we're sort of like a yin-yang. There's little aspects of, I think, both of those sides of us within each other. So it's kind of a nice balance, and we just sort of keep each other level-headed.
When one of us gets too deep, the other one typically is able to pull us out.
Yeah.
That's usually how it works.
So you join forces and you get together. How did the Travelling Museum of the Paranormal and the Occult start?
Totally by accident. It wasn't. We never set out to do anything like that. It's just, you know, we were the weird kids, and our family members and friends would say, "Hey, I have this thing. I don't want it. It gives me bad vibes," and so they would just give it to us. Or, you know, we'd have investigations where somebody had something that they thought was the source of their activity, so they'd give it to us, or even friends and colleagues would say, "Hey, I'm not comfortable keeping this in my house. Will you take this?" And one day we were giving a lecture about about 5 or 6 years ago about how to get abducted by aliens. We had done a very weird experiment, and we were talking about this at a big conference here in Kentucky, and they gave us a booth, and we didn't have anything to sell or promote, and we thought, well, we've got all these really interesting objects and artifacts, and they're just collecting dust in the house, so let's put them on display and let people test them and investigate them themselves. And it was like half a dozen, and we had a little handwritten sign that said the Traveling Museum, and people loved it. And we didn't anticipate the kind of response that we would get, because people don't have the opportunity to experience that stuff except in a few places. Particularly in the U.S., there's only a few places where they can do that. And we realized, wow, there's something here. We should probably take this idea a little more seriously. And now, we're coast to coast all year long. People send us stuff. We got a post office box where things show up all the time. We're picking things up from people. Middle of the night driving to another state to go pick something up from somebody. It's just spiraled out of control.
When you first started getting these artifacts from people, did you get any activity yourselves from these, or was it they just stored and you didn't get anything from them?
I think initially, absolutely. There's always activity in the house. I think we've either just learned how to sort of live alongside it. It's respectfully. But yeah, in the beginning, there was I think we were still learning, at that stage, how to properly care for a lot of this stuff. So there was a lot of kind of trial and error, a lot of, well, that didn't work, so let's figure out a new way to potentially, keep these things. And so not everything in the museum is stored. We do have pieces that are out around the house, but for the most part, most of it has its own special space where it's sort of stored and cared for and energetically kind of cleansed, and we kind of lather, rinse, repeat, and every time a new object gets introduced to the museum, it's sort of an interesting experience, because sometimes certain objects will cause other objects to become more active. So it's just sort of like constantly recognizing that it's never gonna be the same, and you're always gonna kind of have to be changing up the way that you're caring for a lot of this stuff.
And it's really only, we get a lot of stuff sent to us. It's really only a few rare pieces that really ever show anything overwhelmingly interesting to us. We're still happy to take the pieces, because I think a lot of what we do is people manifest their problems into an object, and to them, giving that object to us is a way of giving their problem away. And so I think there's a psychological aspect to what we do with the museum. But occasionally there's something that shows up that really does demonstrate some very interesting activity. And we just roll with it. It's always touch and go.
One of the objects in your collection is called Billy the Idol. I love the name, by the way.
Very, very dad jokey of us.
Incredibly interesting piece in its look. Just to start with, it's a wooden carved figure, isn't it, with geometric designs inlaid into it.
Uh-huh.
Tell me, how did that come into your possession? Because that was a bit of a weird story, wasn't it?
Yeah, Billy was one of those rare items. He's one of those things that popped up and changed a lot of our perspective on how we approached items after that. A few years ago, there was a guy who heard us. We were doing a radio interview much like this, and there was a guy who heard us and sent us an email afterwards and said, listen, I caught your show. I have something I'd like to send to you. I think you'd be really into it, but it would cost me an arm and a leg to ship it. When I looked you guys up, I see that you're in Cincinnati, Ohio. I'm in Dayton, Ohio. It's maybe a half-hour drive for each of us. If you'll meet me in the middle, I'll just give it to you. Dana was immediately against this idea of meeting some guy who heard us on like late night radio, just sight unseen, who says, I have something for you. And I obviously took what Dana was feeling to heart, and I emailed him back and said, yeah, what time you want to meet?
Yes.
It feels like she's more the steadying influence in this relationship. Go, come on,
Yes.
think about that. That could be dangerous, darling.
Oh no, for sure. And fortunately this was a fairly solid pickup. We've had some that I was convinced that we were going to be murdered on, but this wasn't one of those. We met this guy in a Walmart parking lot who was very normal. He just looked like a typical Midwestern dad, but he had this burlap sack that he was holding far away from his body. He seemed very uncomfortable carrying it. And he waltzed up and he said, is your name Greg? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, it's your problem now. And he handed it to me and they started walking away. And I said, whoa. It doesn't work like that. You got to give me more than this. You got to tell me what was happening. In his email, he told me that he was having really intense, frightening nightmares. And that was part of the reason he wanted to get rid of this thing. And I said, tell me about these dreams. Tell me about these nightmares. Any piece of information might help. Because just because you give this to us doesn't mean the activity is going to stop. Mm-hmm. And he kind of hemmed and hawed about it for a minute and said, well, I'm not comfortable repeating what my wife was dreaming about. But I had a dream that I was in bed with my wife. We were watching TV. And it just didn't even seem like a dream. It was super real. And he said that he reached over on the nightstand, took this big knife, stabbed his wife in the chest, cut her all the way down through her stomach, pulled her heart out, started eating it. And he said he could taste the blood. He could smell it. He could feel the warmth of it. And he woke up in a cold sweat and said, this thing has to go. And he had found it bound up in that burlap sack underneath a house he'd only been living in for about 6 months down in the crawl space. And that was the final straw. He'd experienced all kinds of other stuff, typical poltergeist type stuff, people running down the halls, and their kid said, the little man comes in my room and pulls the covers off of me. And but the violent dreams were the last straw. And so he handed Billy to us, and that's kind of where our work began.
So you get him in the back of your car and you're driving home. Now, these images are in your head now. You've heard the story and you're driving home in the dark with this weird thing in the back that is, incredibly negative when you've listened to the story. Was it eventful, or did you have a smooth journey home?
So we get home and, we're looking at it and everything's fine. And I was excited because we had an event the following day that we had to travel up to Upper Michigan for. So it's 7-8 hour drive, and I'm always excited to take new artifacts to events because we learn more from people who are experts at stuff that we're not experts at. And so that's an opportunity for us to meet people who are like, we've met people who've cracked cases for us because they're like experts on their family is a lumber family, so they're experts on what kind of wood things are made out of. And I was really excited to see what people thought, especially to see what kind of impressions people got of this. But on the way there, we broke down and had to get towed. And at the car shop, the guy was like, "Hey, there's nothing wrong with your car. It's fine." And the car started up just fine. And we went, "Oh well, we put a lot of miles on the car." 2 weeks later, we had another event. Same thing. Broke down halfway. Nothing's wrong with your car, man. Starts right up. So that's when we realized, oh, something new is doing this, and it was Billy. So we had a conversation and said, listen, we want to help you. We want to do whatever we can. We were given the advice to give him an offering of rum and tobacco, traditional offering to the spirits, and just say, listen, your job's done. You can stay or you can leave. And we never had a problem with the car after that, but I started having strange dreams. Where this little man who had jet black skin and bright blue eyes was always staring at me. He never talked, but he was always staring at me in a room full of people. Always a place that had to do with travel. And it was very much the feeling, I see you now, and you see me. We're aware of one another. And that's when things really got weird, because we would start to do EVP sessions with him, and it was nothing but screaming. Like, it really started people. And there were a lot of people who were like, I can't believe you're letting people associate with this thing. It's a demon, obviously. And we're very much one of our mottos is curiosity over fear. If you're afraid of something and you're afraid to push past it, you've built a brick wall around your understanding of the world. And we just said, no, we don't really know what's going on. Nobody's been hurt. People were having strange dreams, particularly if they would hold the idol. And then after working with him long enough, actual words started to pop up in these EVP recordings, and there was personality there, and there was awareness, and there was even, there were jokes in them. Yeah. And it's still, I've never had this type of interaction with anything else ever before. And after working with him long enough and other people working with him, we started to notice people were bringing him gifts a lot. We're not really sure where that came from. They just kind of said, I feel drawn to do this. So people would bring him, they often cigarettes or dollar bills or even things that were personal to them. Like we've had people give old wedding rings to him and missing posters. And we realized something special was happening here. And it was we did an event in Chicago, and at this event there was a guy who was an archaeologist. He worked for the Chicago's Field Museum, and we said, dude, please come look at some of our stuff. And we showed him Billy, and he said, well, my specialty is Native American artifacts, but I do have a friend who works in Africa, and he can probably tell me more. And this guy basically cracked everything open. The one thing Billy would never do is tell us his name, which is why we called him Billy. He'd never tell us his name, never tell us where he's from. He would just laugh. And through this archaeologist, we found out that he's a Kisi figure from the Central Congo region, and they were often used to speak to the gods of the Congolese people, to the spirits of the land and the water and the sky, their ancestors, and they would often communicate through dreams, for one. And the way that you would typically activate a Kisi is you would give them a gift, and people were doing this stuff automatically. And had we not pushed past that fear, or that initial fear and other people's fear, we would have never figured out what he is. And now, he's a staple of the museum. He's really the museum's mascot in a lot of ways. And there'll probably be a time when Billy goes home, whatever that's supposed to be. But until then, he's been a wonderful way to teach people not to be afraid of something they don't understand, because it really it gives you a really narrow worldview, particularly if you're a paranormal investigator.
This is very, very true. And this is quite something that comes up time and time again in the field, isn't it? Where you see people go, oh, I'm not going back to that location. I had a really bad experience there and I can't do that. So
right.
And you're so right. Fear does hold you back. But curiosity did get you into the field in the first place.
Well, that's exactly it. And I think a lot of people forget that after a while. And I think, I think a lot of people in the paranormal community are held back by dogmas, and they're held back by ideas and thoughts that are implanted in them, and they can't push past that because it makes them uncomfortable. But guys, it's the paranormal. Like, it's uncomfortable.
And I think what's cool about the museum specifically is it's sort of one of the goals is to continuously be shifting people's perspectives. And I think that's really all that we can do for the most part, is try to lead by example and help change people's perspectives and make them see things from a different angle. And again, kind of teaching about, we talk a lot about the ethics of haunted objects, and Billy is such a good example of that, because so often you do hear people who, they tell stories about objects that they have that are active, and they have attachments, and there's things connected to them. And there's a sense of them sort of being exploited at that point, instead of researched and cared for.
And understood.
And so we're kind of always trying to remind people that if we do believe that objects have the ability to be haunted, and we believe that they have intelligence attached to them, then we have a responsibility to be caretakers of them and not, put them in a ring of salt or exploit them or make them out to be something really silly. And that's all that we can ever hope for. And it's sort of a point that we constantly are trying to drive home, and in the hopes that it will help shift people's perspectives and change the way that they think about a lot of this stuff.
Is Billy going to be one of the items you bring with you to Sage Paracon this year?
Oh, we wish. The problem with Billy is Billy has ivory inlays, and we're always nervous about taking him across international lines. We do a lot of different events, but Billy doesn't go. He also doesn't like airplanes. We took him on an airplane once.
It was the worst experience ever.
He didn't talk for a week after that.
It's one of the hard things about.
Doesn't travel well.
He's not.
He's very much
good at that.
I mean, it sounds crazy to talk about. I'm sure if anybody just like randomly tuned in and they hear us talking about, this idol that we talk to or we see in dreams, it sounds crazy, but he always has his own special seat in the car when we drive to places. I think we have a responsibility. This was an object that the Congolese people treated with a lot of reverence and respect, and so we have a responsibility to do the same thing. And so we always try and do that. There's even times where if we feel like the event isn't right for it, we won't even take him, because if we think like people are going to, not treat him with reverence and respect, or treat him more as a curiosity than anything else, he just won't show up. And as much as we love to bring him to Sage Paracon, he's just, number one, he doesn't like airplanes, and number two, because of his ivory, we just have to be really careful with where we take him.
Oh, that's a fair point. So can you give me a sneaky peek about what you are going to be able to bring to Sage this year?
Well, obviously we have to bring a smaller version of the museum than we would like to bring, just because we have to travel by plane. But we have a few of our favorite objects. There's one in particular we're going to bring that isn't the actual object itself. It's an object that we had to mold and recreate, because the original one is buried in the Catskill Mountains after a pretty big ritual. There was an object we called the crone, and it was sent to us by a couple hikers who found it in the Catskills. A lot of really terrible things started to happen to them, and the crone story was one that took us a long time to figure out and get to the bottom of.
We spent years studying this object specifically because once it arrived in the museum, it was one of the most active, and by the looks of it, it seemed as if the activity was pretty negative, and we were experiencing a lot of negative things around this specific object, and other people were experiencing a lot of negative things around the object.
To paint a picture for people, it was a figure of a woman with her it's a hand-carved figure of a woman, maybe about 7 or 8 inches tall, and it had a noose around its neck and rusty nails driven into the eyes. And it was obvious, just on a sympathetic magic level, whoever had done this wanted to hurt or harm somebody. And we experienced everything from wet footprints manifesting on our couch to a television, trying to be dumped on my head, trying to deal with this thing. Loud bangs on the walls. It's still one of the scariest experiences we had, but it was really just one of those things where we had to sit it down and say, listen, we're willing to share our space with you. We want to understand you. It's obvious you need something. We want to know what that is, but you have to work with us. And, we, again, started taking it out to different events. Sometimes we wouldn't even bring it out of the box. It was one of the few things that was a hands-off item. We like people to handle items. We like them to be able to touch them and feel the tactile sensation of these things. But this was one that we didn't feel comfortable with. And then there was an event at a convention we were at where things had gotten to such a scary place with this piece that somebody had begged us to take it out of the box. And we normally, if we feel weird about it or the crowd is weird, we wouldn't bring it out. But he wanted to see it. He'd traveled so far. We bring it out of the box, and as soon as we take it out, the lights in the place flicker. The light starts swinging down the whole aisle of the conference hall. And then a man keels back in his chair, falls on the ground and has a seizure, and starts bleeding out of his mouth. And the guy who had asked us to take the crown out of the box just starts to cry and say, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. And after that, we said, well, we can never display this again. And that's when we came up with an idea to finally take it back to the cave it had been stolen from.
The Cronus is another really good example of kind of what we like doing with the museum, where it's sort of when we recognize that when we receive an object, it's sort of square one for us, and it means that we have a whole lot of research to do. And so at this point in time, we knew, okay, this object can't stay with us, and it can't stay with someone else, and it needs to go back to its place of origin. So we really started to think about how we were going to do that. And it took us months and months, and we kind of put together a small group. There was 3 of us, and we hiked deep into the Catskill Mountains off of any kind of path, and as far in as we possibly could to a spot that we felt was safe enough for her to be buried. And we did a ritual basically to release what had been attached to this object, to kind of separate it from the sympathetic magic that had been done to it. So the noose was removed and the nails were removed from the eyes. And then she was buried, and that's where she is. And
Dana's downplaying this a bit because she actually had like a couple hundred witches all across the world doing an intense ritual at the same exact time that we were to help us with this. And I mean, it's we all broke down crying after it was done, because as soon as that noose was removed and those nails were removed, all the coyotes on the mountain started howling at the same time, and we hadn't heard them at all for the previous night. And it was a really powerful, moving thing. And we put a black shroud around the item, and we buried the item, and then it was over. And we've since figured out what the item was and why this had happened to it, and why the area was interesting. And that's material that we're working on another documentary. That's probably going to be our next thing after Hellier season 2, is a documentary about the crone and what happened there. But we'll actually have one of the craziest things we did, is something no one's ever done before, is we actually made a museum quality replica of this thing on the mountain in a tent in freezing weather. We actually had to carry our own propane heater up, because the material had to be a specific 72 degrees to set up properly. So we froze to death because we didn't have a heater, but the other tent where we did the molding had a heater. And so now we have this perfect museum quality replica. So the item is safe. We can still tell this story, and tell an important story with an important message with this piece, without having to worry about anyone being harmed and this thing being exploited. So we'll have that with us for sure. Oh,
fantastic. Well, I can't wait for that documentary. Gosh, talking of documentaries, Hellier hit last year onto YouTube. Strange platform, because you have your own platforms that you can release material on anyway. So thank you for making it free to start with, so everybody could enjoy it. Hellier, incredibly strange. Case of a lifetime, I would say. And it started off very basically as a basic cryptozoology case, weird footprints, strange reports. It's like, do you investigate? You've got so much else going on. So there must have been something straight away when you first got those emails through that got you, that captured you.
Yeah, I mean, we get emails all the time, and I think anyone who's done this long enough understands. It's easy to get jaded on some of this stuff. There's only so many pictures of orbs you can look at before you just stop responding. It's tough. And so when this email came in, I initially thought it was one of my friends, playing a prank on me, because it just seemed, way too good to be true. It was just crazy. And I sent a response email, and I was like, listen, if this is really what's happening, I need some evidence. I was living in Canada at the time, and the person who emailed saying that these little creatures were coming out of a mine shaft on his property and terrorizing his family. He was in Kentucky. Kentucky was a long way away, and I'd never visited Kentucky before. And I thought, well, if this guy's pulling my leg, he's not going to be able to provide any solid evidence. And so I sent him an email back, and I said, I'd love to help, but you need to, send me, if these things are leaving, evidence that they're there, send it to me. And not too long later, he sent another email, and it was loaded with photographs of these 3-toed footprints, and even what he said were the creatures themselves. And the first thing I did is, I knew a lot of Bigfoot hunters at the time, and so I sent the footprints to the Bigfoot hunters I knew, and they were blown away because they had dermal ridges on them, and dermal ridges are basically like fingerprints for your feet, and they're very hard to fake. And so they said, you should probably take this seriously, because this is wild. And they said they're too small to be Bigfoot prints, but that's really weird. And so, I took it seriously. I asked for more details. And then this guy just disappeared. And it was always one of those weird things, nagging in the back of my head, like, what happened? He said, I'm leaving this house. I'm done. That they packed up and left. And he took his family. And he actually got photographs of the creatures themselves the night that he went back. I think it was his brother-in-law to get the rest of their stuff. And then we just never heard from him again after that. After that, I started to get emails from this other guy who called himself Terry Wrist, which sounds like terrorist, but it was Terry Wrist with a W. And the only reference I could find to this guy was in a really weird, obscure ufology book from the 90s called Secret Cipher of the Ufonauts. And it was a very weird book by paranormal standards. It was all about using ritual magic to contact extraterrestrials. And it's the only reference I could find to this guy, Terry Wrist, and it was in the appendix of these books where there was an interview between the author, Alan Greenfield, and this guy, Terry. And it was a pseudonym that he used because he claimed he was a guy who dealt with problems that had to do with aliens. And so at this point, I'm like, this is insane. This is crazy. I'm all in. I want I want to figure this out. But there was just really no good way to do it. And after Dana and I moved to Cincinnati for work, we realized we were only like 4.5 hours away from Hellier. So one day we drove out and we got so many interesting stories from people. Thought we even found a place that matched the bill for where this guy David had lived. And we just planned on going back. But life being as it is, it was literally – how long was it after that the Finding Bigfoot thing happened?
I think it was honestly a month.
Maybe a month.
Month and a half.
We got contacted to do an episode of Finding Bigfoot. And life just went crazy after that. And we never had a chance to do it. And it just kind of died. And then one day our friend Carl, who we had previously met at the Stanley Hotel, he heard a podcast episode about us talking about the case. And he had this rush of synchronicities that happened to him. And he said, I think we're supposed to go do this now. I think we need to do this. We need to do this. And I'm like, I don't know, man. I don't know if it's going to go anywhere. But he was so driven and so compelled. He pretty much just pressured us into it. And then it became one of the weirdest, craziest cases we've ever tackled. And it just gets weirder by the day.
It certainly is a very strange scenario that you go through. You outline all of this in the documentary that you've done. A couple of things I'd like to ask on that. When you first went, just you and Dana, and you hit Hellier, you said you thought you found where this David had lived. But when you went back the second time, you couldn't kind of find it again.
Yeah. I'll say this. That question is answered very definitively in the second season. Because it was always weird to us, and we didn't really know how to grapple with that, because it was a place that Dana and I had found without too much effort first time there. And it fit. I mean, it checked all the boxes. And it was very, very weird to us that we could not find it no matter how hard we looked the second time we went.
I remember it distinctly being kind of one of the most frustrating days was, driving all over Hellier. I mean, Hellier's not big, but there's lots of little like roads that go up to hollers, and, it can feel as if you're in sort of a maze. And we drove all over the mountains searching for that house, and it was just the most frustrating thing on the planet.
There's a very definitive answer to that question that we learned. So the crazy thing about Hellier is it's not made in the typical fashion that like a typical paranormal show is made. I mean, we are always in it. Like there's no off button on it. So we actually started to shoot the second season of Hellier long before the first season was even released. And it wasn't that we thought for sure there was going to be a second season. It was just there were so many weird things happening. But there was a moment during the filming of the second season, what turned into the second season, where we figure out definitively why we did not find that house the first time through. And it's very weird.
Right. I'll have to wait then to see what happens on that one.
Yes. Yeah. No spoilers. No spoilers. There's not long to wait.
I'm hoping to get some spoilers out of you guys tonight. The second thing, you spoke quite a lot about synchronicities and coincidences that were happening around the time. In fact, there was a drinking game, I believe, that was trending at the time when it was first released. That every time
surprised no one died from that. That's kill you. Don't do that.
Yeah, don't do that, guys. I tried it one night. It's just not happening. But although you referenced it, a lot of the coincidences and synchronicities that you experienced weren't really outlined. Can you tell me some of those that were going on? Because it must have been one of those, so much was happening at that time that it's hard to document it all in the documentary, isn't it?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's even stuff, particularly in the first season, that's so weird that we didn't think audiences would respond to it, so we didn't include it. I mean, there's really strange stuff that happened. There was things like legitimately manifesting out of thin air.
Yeah, we had. I don't think that this is it made it in any way. Maybe we've talked about it before, but that we had an experience at one point in time at the cabin where a bottle actually appeared. So there was a bottle sitting on the porch that was outside of the house, and it appeared inside of a locked car. It popped
off of the porch somehow
into a locked car
that no one had gone near.
And there were
all night.
There was a lot of those types of experiences that, like Greg said, they're so weird, and we weren't able to document them until after the fact, that we just sort of felt they didn't necessarily have a place.
And then as far as the synchronicities went, I mean, there were so many, it's even hard to remember, because they were even down to little things like, somebody with a specific name in town would give us a piece of information, and then we would be looking through Secret Cipher or one of John Keel's books, and that name would pop out, or a location would pop out. And one of the things that I think is touched on briefly in the first season is, spoiler, but one of the things that happens in the first season is there's a very strange incident with a tin can, and it sounds silly to talk about, but to us it was very meaningful. And then to find out just a day or two later after coming home, John Keel has a whole thing about tin cans and about seeing tin cans and tin can robots, and that specifically is connected to a place not very far from somewhere Connor mentions in one of his Estes Method sessions, which is Stillwater, Minnesota. And so that was another weird synchronicity that popped up. There were just so many of them, whether it was just seeing the same numbers over and over and over again, particular number pattern, particular number sequence, names,
places, locations,
those types of things just continuously hit us over and over and over again, to the point where, I think we have a slightly altered view of synchronicities now going into the second season. And we kind of outlay a lot of that and where that's come from and why we think that way now in the second season. But it was basically so many of them were happening that they were hard to keep track of, and it was just a sign to us that something was going on and we needed to pay attention to the situation we were in right then and there.
Mm-hmm. So your cryptozoology case turns into basically a ufology case, a spiritual case. It covers just about every area of the paranormal. And this is just in the first episode, people. So goodness knows what's coming in the second episode. Living this, do you get to the point where you think, are we just being over paranoid or overthinking everything? Are we just seeing stuff are we just joining dots here and coming up with something else?
All the time. So that was actually a really big issue after the first season was, we were tearing our hair out because it felt like we were sent on a wild goose chase. And it's really fascinating because, you can look at the first season in two ways. You can look at it where it's like, oh, well, they didn't find anything. One of those it's all about the friends we made along the way stories, we didn't find anything. We didn't find a goblin, But then on the other hand, I think anyone that legitimately expected us to drag a dead goblin out of a mine shaft with, AK-47 slung over our shoulders was probably hoping for a bit much.
Yeah.
So I don't think we were actually. I would have loved to have found a footprint or something to that effect. Like, that's what I was hoping for. But what we got was really a prologue to the bigger story. And there's a reason why the second season is nearly double the length of the first season. And so that idea that we drove ourselves nuts with, which is we just look crazy. We're internalizing all of this, and we're looking at things that might not exist, and we're stretching things. Like, we're very aware of.
It's an easy argument to make against what we're doing.
And we always try very hard, and we're very aware of the idea that sometimes it might look like we're trying to stretch things to fit, particularly in the first season. Like, that was an issue the whole time, which is why there's a lot of stuff that didn't end up in there. Mm-hmm. We're very self-aware. And I think that's part of the reason why a lot of people like the first season is we are self-aware, and we show people our dead ends, and we show people how frustrated we are. But when people see the second season, I cannot stress this enough. There is no denying. Yeah. I mean, honestly, this is a very big statement for me to say. There is no denying that everything that happened in that first season was there on purpose.
Yeah.
And the connections that have come out of that, and the I got to be careful what I say, because Carl will kill me. People will see it and they will be absolutely blown away. And I think that people who wrote off the first season because they thought that some of the connections were tenuous are going to see this, and they're going to go, holy cow.
Yeah.
This is for real.
The second season, I think, will lend a lot of gravity to a lot of the things that happened in the first season that maybe it would be easy for people to kind of argue against. And I think, honestly, when you're finished watching the second season, it will give you a new pair of eyes to go back and rewatch the first season with. Like, it will change the way that you experience the first season.
So many things from the first season that didn't make sense or just seem to be left there come back around in very big ways. And there's a reason we've been calling the first season of Hellier a prologue, because it really truly is. It gives you all of the information you need for all of the big impacts that happen in the second season. And I mean, we've been done with the second season for weeks now, and things are still happening, and like leads are still popping up. It's very hard to know how and when to put an end cap on that, because it's something that's happening all the time. Okay, well, from my perspective, watching Hellier as an investigator, researcher person, it was a breath of fresh air, because of exactly what you said. You showed the frustration, you showed the dead ends, you showed the work that goes into it, the sitting around, and the weird things that you go, I'm just imagining that one. Do you know what I mean? That sort of thing. Do you think people are sometimes too dismissive of things like coincidences and synchronicities that go on, and so they miss stuff?
Absolutely. I think, there's a lot of reasons for that. And one of the major ones, I think, for us is that a lot of people are very used to a formula when they think of paranormal entertainment. And they're used to it based on television and a lot of television shows and even some documentaries. And there's a formula. There's a way that people on TV kind of go about a paranormal investigation. And one of the biggest problems is when you do have television shows, and it's not all of them, but it is, obviously it's happened throughout the years. There are producers who aren't really invested in paranormal investigation, and they're kind of willing to do whatever they need to do to have a spooky moment. And even it can even be edited a certain way to give it a spooky moment when maybe there wasn't one there. And I think people become very used to a type of feeling when they're watching paranormal television. And so when you give them something that's different and maybe in a lot of ways closer to the actual experience of a paranormal investigation, I think it can be very frustrating, because they're very used to those kind of big bang moments where there's an orb or there's a weird EVP or there's something that kind of it feels very scary in the moment. And it's not, again, that Hellier isn't that. Hellier's a creeping fear. It slowly gets under your skin. It gets in your head and it gets under your skin. And I think that the difference is that a majority of the time with like paranormal television, and again, not all paranormal television, but you do have these kind of big moments where people get very accustomed accustomed to seeing something, move or whatever. And it can be very frustrating because it does kind of paint what we do in a not realistic kind of expectation.
And I mean, you'll know this too. Like, ghost hunting is not, paranormal investigation in general is not what it appears to be on television. Yeah. It's oftentimes very slow and methodical.
Yeah, it's a lot of us sitting around in the dark, basically.
Yeah.
and which I think is a really great allegory for the phenomena.
Yeah, no, it does.
Is we are always in the dark, and once in a while something reaches out to tap us on the shoulder, and that is a very rare thing. And so, yes, people. Long story short, people should pay more attention to coincidences and synchronicities in particular, because if they do, I think they'll start to pay. What Hellier has done for us and so many others is make them take a little bit more stock of the world around them, and I think that's part of the point and part of the reason Hellier's made. We're at the point now where we've just kind of thrown our hands up and gone, okay, we're making this on behalf of the phenomena. What's supposed to happen will happen, and we're doing this for a reason, and there's a purpose, and that's very evident in the second season. And the threads of it are there in the first season if people pay attention. We didn't understand at the time, but now we realize so many people that see Hellier have they change the way that they see the world, and in so much are changing the way they approach the phenomena, and they start to have more experiences with the phenomena. In a lot of ways, the release of Hellier has been an investigation in and of itself, and the results are really intriguing.
It certainly is, and like I said, I found it an absolute breath of fresh air in regards to watching a paranormal investigation going, and it is a paranormal investigation, not a ghost investigation, everybody.
Right.
It led me down a lot of different pathways on my journey. I went away and read the Mothman Prophecies, which I hadn't read.
Fantastic.
So, yeah, I read that, and I'm trying to get hold of a copy of that other book, the other one, The Occult Ritual.
Secret.
Yeah, I can't
Secret Cipher.
Yeah,
I would suggest, and if anyone else is listening to you, I would suggest picking up the complete Secret Cipher of the Euphonauts, which is a new version that was put out that contains both the first Secret Cipher of the Euphonauts and the sequel, which is Secret Rituals of the Men in Black, because that will probably be an important book too.
And it was written by Alan Greenfield.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I'll also put it out there that led me down a pathway of trying to see if there were other forms of ritual that you could maybe, encounter alien entities or paranormal entities. And I found a reference to Aleister Crowley. So it's led me down different pathways in my personal research after watching Hellier. So I have got to say a big thank you for showcasing true paranormal investigation, the frustration, the dead ends and all that. And the other thing you've brought to the field, which I don't know if you're fully aware of, is the impact of the Estes method. Now, it had been shown on the Stanley Hotel episodes with Carl and Connor. But hadn't really sort of took off. I didn't know about it. A lot of people didn't know about it, but people are now using that method a lot more in the field, and taking it and actually going forward and evolving that method for themselves. How does that make you feel? Because that's a big impact on the paranormal field. It's a completely different way of investigating.
I'll be the first one to say it. I hate ghost boxes. I really don't like them. I just think that they're junk. I'm not a big fan of a lot of ITC, and I think it's just because it's very subjective. And when you're doing it in a big group of people and you have this thing spitting out random noise, it's very easy for people to just make it sound what they think it's supposed to sound like, or what they want it to sound like. And when Carl and Connor, when we first saw them do the Estes method, which they developed at the Stanley Hotel, like they didn't even have a name for it. I suggested the name Estes method to them when I noticed other people using it. And I was like, well, you should probably give it a name. People want to know what to call it. When I saw what they were doing with it, and I realized that they were getting rid of a lot of the problems with using a ghost box in a room full of people, and I started to notice what I personally think is a psychical element, a parapsychological element to the use of the Estes method with the sensory deprivation. I was blown away. It finally made a reason to have a ghost box. Like I bought my first ghost box after seeing that because I was so blown away with it, and the results I've seen from it are incredible. And it's funny because there's people out there that knock it, and I totally understand it, but they're either using the wrong headphones. They think that noise canceling headphones are what they're supposed to be using, which is not the case. They're actually noise isolating headphones made specifically for drummers that'll block out a ton of noise. So it really eliminates fraud. When you stick to what they have developed as the Estes method and you build upon that, that is where the magic lies, because I truly do believe, and I know Carl and Connor may not agree with me on this. They have different opinions on it, but I really truly do believe that you're tapping into a very psychical part of yourself and doing something that is very akin to trance work or mediumship in a technologically assisted manner. And it's mind-blowing, the results that I've seen, the results that all of us have seen from it. And even in some of the stuff people are going to see in the second season of Hellier is going to make them think a lot more about what the Estes method is and what's actually doing. It's mind-blowing to me. I think it's fantastic, and I love that more people are using it because I think more people should be investigating the avenues of the mind and the powers of the mind when it comes to investigating the paranormal, because I think that's where the answers lie, is within us, not somewhere externally. I think it lies somewhere in our noggin.
Hallelujah. Is all I'm going to say on that one. That's very much preaching to my own thoughts on the paranormal, that it's an externalization of an internal process. Most definitely. Now, Dana, you work incredibly spiritually. You actually do a couple of little rituals yourself while you're in Hellier. How did that feel to you? How do you evolve that for that specific circumstance?
For me, magic has always sort of been something that I've felt really melded nicely with my paranormal investigation. So I've always kind of liked to have aspects of that be something that I incorporate in whatever investigation we're doing. So when we decided that we were going to go to Hellier and we were going to make Hellier, it was one of the things I sort of brought up with Carl and Connor, because neither of them have any kind of background in that stuff. So I was sort of like, this is going to happen. So you just, you're going to have to deal with it. And luckily they were both really, yeah, exactly. Get ready. But luckily they were both really open to the aspect of kind of involving magic into a lot of what we're doing. So yeah, some of the rituals that I did specifically to greet the land, because Hellier is such a strange place. It feels very, very weird when you're there. You feel, a bit like you're in a waking dream. And there's something about the land that felt really specifically important. So that was one of the things that I really wanted to do, was make that kind of connection with the place and the spirits of that place. And yeah, so I usually kind of tailor whatever I'm doing to be respectful to the location and to hopefully open up lines of communication, because why not? If it's an option that we have to work with, I think it's something that is great, as long as you're a practiced magic practitioner. I think that it's a wonderful tool to use for paranormal investigation.
I totally agree with that as well. Now, coming to the end of Hellier season 1, you said you felt it kind of had reached at that point a natural conclusion, and that part of it was done. Do you go back to Hellier in season 2?
What do you think?
I really want you to.
Maybe we do.
Maybe. I'm trying hard for you guys out there listening for spoilers, but they're not giving much away, are they?
I feel like if we do, Carl will murder both of us.
Yeah. I think I'll put it this way. I think people are going to be very surprised where season 2 takes us. And I think we were premature in saying that we were done with anything. We were obviously are. I mean, if people, they just have to watch the trailer to the second season and they'll see, we were premature in saying that. But I think that we're not finished. Okay. We wouldn't be making the second season. But we're not finished, I think, in any of the places that we've been to.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to have to move on because we're running out of time rapidly. I could probably talk to you for hours and hours. Now, you are coming to the UK for Sage Paracon.
Yes.
Yay!
Have you been to the UK before?
Never.
No, we are so stinking excited.
I'm ready.
Yeah.
And at Sage, what will you be talking about? What's your talk going to be about? Is it just Hellier, or are you going to be broadening that?
Well, I think we'll have an opportunity to discuss Hellier, I think, but we're going to talk about haunted objects. We're going to talk about some of the work that we've done with that and show people a lot of material that no one's ever seen. We have a really fantastic multimedia lecture we've been putting together over the course of like 3 or 4 years that gives a really deep dive into why we do what we do with these objects. So that's the focus of our presentation. But I have a feeling there will be. I don't want to spoil anything, but I have a feeling there'll be a lot of Hellier discussion as well.
Excellent news is all I'm going to say. I have heard on the grapevine, and I don't know if I'm allowed to say this or not, that there may even be a private screening of the first episode.
We're working on that.
We're working on Carl.
We've got to get the okay from the director, but it's close enough to the official date that I don't know. We might be able to sneak the first episode out of them. We'll see.
Ooh, we'll have to hope and cross our fingers on that one, but it'll certainly be
cross your fingers. Do your own magic ritual.
Yes. We'll get a worldwide one going on just to make that happen. Most definitely. Or I just nag him constantly by text.
That's good too.
What are you looking forward to the most coming to Sage this year?
I'm really looking forward to meeting everybody. I mean, we travel across the United States all year long. And this is the first time that we have the opportunity to jump across the pond. And I'm really excited to meet all the people that are going to be at Sage Paracon. I'm excited to talk to them. I'm excited to see how everybody over there does their investigating and what they're interested in and the different themes in the type of investigation work that they're doing. That's what I'm the most excited for. I'm also really excited just to hang out, to hang out in the UK in this beautiful location and investigate with friends that we don't get to see very often. I think that's going to be a blast.
It is certainly the premier convention in the UK you're coming to. I would say that MJ does an amazing job at the convention. And you've got the voodoo party.
Yeah.
Have you got your costumes sorted?
Oh God, no.
We're the worst last minute costume people. But
we can pull it
together. I feel like the pressure of putting it together at the last minute means that we nail it usually. So
I'm not worried about it.
Let's stick with the.
We have a few ideas.
Yeah.
No, so we can't even get sneaky peeks on your costumes, guys. This is like
no. No, we're very good at keeping secrets.
Very, very good. Guys, if you want tickets for Sage Paracon for this year, there are very, very few tickets left. You need to go to www.sageparacon.co.uk where you'll find the whole list of guest speakers and all the rundown of what's happening between the 7th and the 10th of November. Running out of time, guys, so quickly get your tickets in and you're going to get to meet these amazing people that I've been speaking to tonight. Well, on that note, can you let everybody know, firstly, where they can find you to watch Hellier and look at the museum and everything else that you do?
Yeah, if people are curious about Hellier, if you haven't seen it yet, it is totally free to watch. Best place to go is probably Hellier, HELLIER.TV. And you can find links there to Amazon Prime and YouTube and even direct download links and more information about the series and the second season that's coming on November 29th. And if you're curious about the work that Dana and I do at the Traveling Museum and haunted objects and things like that, you can go to paramuseum.com. And there's lots of information there with links out to all the other stuff that we do.
Fantastic. I would love to come back onto Parasearch at a future date to talk to me a little bit more about Hellier season 2 once it's been released, obviously, because then we'll know what our spoilers are. We won't need spoilers. We'll be able to just discuss it. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
We will be. Absolutely.
We would be thrilled.
Thank you.
Because it's killing us keeping the secrets in anyway.
I'm absolutely. I literally can't tell you how excited I am personally to see it. I mean, the first series blew me away.
I can't wait.
Yeah, and I can't wait for season 2.
If you like the first season, the second season is going to blow your mind. We've seen the rough cuts of the first several episodes, and it's amazing. Already, I mean, it's incredible. It's off to the races after the first episode, and people are going to lose it. I think it's really going to change the way people see the paranormal.
Fantastic. Thank you once again. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. And I will be in touch to book a second interview with you after it's been released. No problem about that. Again, guys, don't forget, Sage Paracon still has very few tickets left, so you need to get in now if you want to go to the Paracon this year. On that note, thank you so much for joining us all. Thanks to you to everybody listening in the chat room. On that note, I bid you a very farewell and a good night. Say good night, guys.
Good night,
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to join us for more shows throughout the week. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and the World Wide Web to keep up to date with all the shows right here on Parasearch Radio.